It started with one photograph, grainy, unfocused, and taken from across a dimly lit street in Europe. But it was enough. Within hours, that image had exploded across social media, sparking headlines that screamed betrayal and whispers that refused to fade. Sam Heughan, the man fans had idolized for his loyalty and charm, was suddenly accused of hiding something, or someone. The picture showed him outside a small restaurant in Paris, smiling faintly, leaning close to a woman whose face was partly hidden by her hair. It could have been innocent. A friend, a colleague, a passing moment misinterpreted, but in the cruel language of fame, innocence doesn't sell. The caption that spread fastest read simply, "Sam Heughan caught in Europe. But where is his wife, Katrina Balfe?" When Katrina saw the photo, she was on set, miles away from him. At first, she laughed, not the laugh of disbelief, but the one people use when they're trying not to show their hurt. The woman who had shared every triumph, every red carpet, every secret look with him suddenly felt a chill she couldn't explain. For years, she and Sam had weathered rumors together. But this time, something was different. This time, the silence on the other end of the phone felt heavier than usual. She called him that night. No answer. She tried again, straight to voicemail. The next morning, his assistant replied with a short message. "Sam's traveling. He'll call when he can." But he didn't. Not that day. Not the next. And in that gap, in that deafening silence, the world filled the void with stories. The tabloids called it the European affair. Anonymous sources spoke of secret meetings, romantic dinners, and hotel encounters. None of it confirmed, none of it real, but the damage was done. Every platform turned into a courtroom, every fan became a detective. The perfect couple, the fairy tale pairing fans had rooted for both on and off screen, suddenly looked fragile. For Katrina, the hardest part wasn't the photo itself. It was remembering how easily the world could turn something beautiful into something ugly. She replayed the years in her head, their beginnings on Outlander, the laughter between takes, the quiet dinners after long days of shooting, the unspoken understanding that had carried them through fame's chaos. They'd promised honesty, no matter how brutal it might be. And yet, she couldn't shake the question. Was there something she had missed? The nights grew longer. Every ping of her phone felt like another fracture in the life she thought she knew. Friends tried to comfort her, telling her not to believe everything online. But Katrina wasn't just another woman reading gossip. She was the wife of the man in those photos. And when you love someone that deeply, doubt doesn't need proof. It just needs silence. Meanwhile, Sam was thousands of miles away, unaware of how quickly the narrative was spiraling. What had been a private trip, a short break to clear his mind, to meet an old friend, had turned into a public spectacle. He'd seen the cameras that night but didn't think much of them. Fame had taught him to ignore flashes and whispers. But when the first messages came from his team, warning him that his name was trending for the wrong reasons, he felt that familiar knot of dread tighten in his chest. He wanted to call her, to explain, to fix everything before it broke. But what could he say? "It's not what it looks like." Those words always sounded guilty, even when they weren't. And so he waited, too long. Long enough for the headlines to grow, for the anger to bloom, for Katrina's faith to start cracking beneath the weight of unanswered questions. When she finally saw him again, weeks later, it wasn't on a set or a red carpet. It was at an airport in Rome, pure coincidence, or maybe fate's cruel joke. She stood there, sunglasses hiding eyes that hadn't slept in days. He froze, guilt and exhaustion etched across his face. For a moment, neither spoke. The world moved around them, cameras flashing, voices calling his name, but they stood still, caught in the wreckage of everything left unsaid. Finally, Katrina broke the silence. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of betrayal and disbelief. "Do you have any idea what they're saying about us?" Sam tried to speak, but words failed him. He reached out, hesitated, then let his hand drop. The look she gave him, half heartbreak, half fear, was worse than anger. It was the look of someone realizing that trust, once cracked, might never be whole again. Later that night, the world saw another photograph, Sam and Katrina leaving the same building, walking apart, eyes downcast. The caption read, "Outlander stars seen together after scandal. Tension in every step." But what the cameras didn't capture was the silence between them. A silence louder than any headline, filled with questions neither dared to ask. And in that silence, the story of their perfect marriage began to unravel. Not with a scream, but with a whisper that refused to fade. For days after their quiet encounter in Rome, both Sam and Katrina vanished from public view. No social media posts, no public appearances, no statements to the press. The world could only speculate, and it did, endlessly. Every silence became a headline. Every guess became fact. Fans split into two sides. Those defending Sam's innocence and those convinced he had betrayed the woman who had stood by him for years. But behind the headlines, the truth was far more complicated, and infinitely more human. Sam was not hiding from guilt. He was hiding from exhaustion. He had spent years balancing fame, expectations, and the fragile boundaries of a relationship constantly watched by millions. He once said in an interview, "When your love life becomes public property, you start losing pieces of yourself." Now, he felt that loss more than ever. The woman in the infamous photo, she wasn't a lover. She was an old friend from his theater days, someone who had once helped him when he was struggling to make ends meet. They'd met by chance while he was filming in Europe. A friendly dinner, a long conversation about the pressures of success, a hug goodbye caught by a stranger's lens, and just like that, a storm was born. Sam tried to explain it all to Katrina. He called, he wrote, he flew home. But the damage had been done, not because she believed the worst, but because the trust between them had already been tested too many times by fame's cruel distortions. She listened quietly, her face calm but her eyes distant. "I want to believe you," she whispered. "But every time I close my eyes, I see that picture." For a long time, neither spoke. It wasn't anger that filled the room, it was grief. The kind of grief that comes from realizing that love alone can't protect you from the world's noise. Sam reached for her hand, but Katrina pulled back gently, not in rejection, but in surrender. "We built something beautiful," she said softly. "But maybe the world loved us too much to let us keep it." Outside, the paparazzi waited. They captured the flashes, the forced smiles, the scripted, "we're fine," responses. But what they didn't capture was what happened when the doors closed. The silence of two people sitting side by side, realizing they had become characters in a story they no longer controlled. As the days turned into weeks, Sam began retreating into himself. He stopped reading the news, stopped checking his phone. Friends said he spent long hours walking the city streets at night, head down, hat pulled low, blending into the crowd like a ghost. He looked lost, one insider later shared. Not because of guilt, but because he didn't know how to fix something that fame had already broken. Katrina, meanwhile, returned to work, professional as ever, poised and composed. But those closest to her noticed a change. The spark that once lit up her interviews was dimmer now. When asked about Sam, she always smiled and said, "He's wonderful, as always." It was the kind of line you give when the truth hurts too much to say aloud. Then came the interview that shifted everything. Sitting in a quiet studio, months after the scandal, Sam finally broke his silence. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed the pain he'd carried for too long. "People think they know what happened," he said. "But they don't. I made mistakes. Not the kind they imagine, but the kind that come from not protecting what matters soon enough." He paused, then added quietly, "When you love someone, sometimes you assume they'll always understand. You take their strength for granted. And by the time you realize what you've lost, it's too late." It wasn't a confession of guilt. It was something deeper. The raw truth of a man who had learned that silence can be more destructive than lies. He never mentioned Katrina by name, but everyone knew who he meant. After that, Katrina released a brief statement of her own. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't bitter. It was heartbreakingly graceful. "Some stories aren't meant to end with villains," she wrote. "Sometimes, they end with two people who loved deeply but lost their way in the noise." The media moved on eventually, hungry for new scandals. But for Sam and Katrina, the scars remained, quiet, invisible, but always there. They continued to work together, still smiling for cameras, still embodying Jamie and Claire, the eternal lovers. But off-screen, their story had changed. The warmth was there, yes, but now it carried the weight of everything they'd survived and everything they'd lost. Years later, when asked if he believed in soulmates, Sam gave a bittersweet smile. "I do," he said. "But sometimes, even soulmates can get lost in the world's glare. And if you're lucky, you find peace in knowing that love, even broken, was real." Because maybe that's what their story had become, not a scandal, not a betrayal, but a lesson about love in the age of exposure. A love that didn't die, it just learned to live quietly, out of sight. And somewhere in that silence, Sam and Katrina both found what they'd been chasing all along. Not forgiveness, not fame, but the fragile comfort of finally letting go.